that's what makes it, I think, sort of frustrating for folks, is that it's not like you can pin it down and just say, Brady short-arming all the throws. That's not the case, or that the wideouts aren't there, that the scheme's not there. It's just kind of collectively that's not clicking. And so that's where I think the bye week comes at a good time, that they can kind of go back and evaluate that, and maybe even start from scratch on what needs to happen play calling wise to get that going, because that's an element that was very much there last year that just hasn't reappeared yet this year. And that's going to be the frustrating part, because you know what this team can be and can do with that element, and it just isn't happening.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Hello and welcome into this week's edition of Mizzou That's Who, your podcast for Missouri Athletics here on KC Sports Network. I'm Tucker Franklin, joined as always by Maggie Johnson. I'm super excited to be joined by Eli Hoff. Eli, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Glad to have you. Mizzou on the bye week, so we had to break down everything that's been going on with the Missouri football team with somebody who is in the know. So glad that you're here, Maggie. How are you doing? How was the game?
It's a loaded question, Tucker.
That was a loaded question.
Very loaded question. So as a lot of you saw, a lot of our listeners saw, I brought my dad, who's a Buckeye fan. Our first game we've ever been to a Mizzou game together. Like, we've been to other games, but first Mizzou one, because he's just not really a Mizzou fan. I told him he can't come back. I'm like, I shouldn't have messed with a good thing. Like, You know what I mean? Like, things have been going up, and I messed it up, and so we're just going back to the way things were. No more dad at the games.
Sometimes you get too cocky, you know. You mess with some stuff because you're feeling pretty confident. Like going into a game against Vanderbilt, you feel pretty good. Look, I went to the game too. Like, it was a last minute choice. I was like texted on Friday, and they're like, "Hey, I got a free ticket. I'll pick you up on the way." And I said, "Okay, fine. I'm in." So maybe I gotta not go to games either. Maybe that's the secret, is that like I can't go to games. But Eli, I want to get your thoughts on the Missouri Vanderbilt game, a game that I've had a lot of people tell me who aren't Missouri fans, like, no, Missouri lost that game. Like, that game is considered a loss in a lot of people's eyes. I know the win column, it shows up in the win column, and that's what I always tell them. But taking Vanderbilt to overtime, a Vanderbilt team that is not great by SEC standards. Overall, just your impressions from that Missouri Vanderbilt game.
Yeah, I mean, at face value, I don't think you can have really a particularly positive impression of it at all. It's, a win is a win, but as much as a win can feel like a loss, I feel like that, probably fits that billing. So, Mizzou's 4-0, and that's important. There aren't a ton of 4-0 teams left, especially not, power conference 4-0 teams that have played games against other power conference teams. So that is big. That is undeniable. You can't take that away. But you did see that there is a negative perception of needing 2 overtimes and a missed field goal to beat Vanderbilt. You drop in the AP poll, you drop in the coaches poll, and frankly, I've seen people worked up about that. I don't think you can get too mad about it. Like, there's a party that can say, well, if that was Mississippi State, who frankly might be worse than Vanderbilt, but, just does the Vanderbilt name and the connotations give you more of a hit? Maybe, but, Missouri didn't play like a top 10 team in the country, and they're no longer a top 10 team in the country. That's just the fact of the matter there. So, a lot of raised heart rates, maybe everybody waking up on Sunday morning, haven't already burned off what they ate at the tailgates beforehand. I don't know. I guess that can be the silver lining to it. And being able to win games that way can work out. It doesn't have to be anything devastating. Look at what Middle Tennessee was last year. It was a nervy game when it shouldn't have been. No, not as nervy, but closer than it should have been. And when it was coming time to talk about Mizzou making a New Year's Six bowl, I don't remember anybody looking back and saying, well, what did the Tigers do against Middle Tennessee? People have pretty short memories with this. So, there's an extra week to stew in this one, but outside of that, it's something this program can move past pretty quickly, I think.
So I do a poll also on Twitter. I do this poll with somebody who has representatives from all FBS schools, and I also dropped them to 11. I think I had them at 6 or 7 and dropped them to 11, and I'm not sure if that's because I'm overly critical of Mizzou, or if that's where they belong. But they didn't, like you said, they didn't look like a top 10 team, so I kind of felt like it was my duty to lower them. But honestly, the games are non-con games that have now kind of played out a little bit more of their schedules haven't turned out to be as bad as a lot of people were saying either. You got Boston College who beat Michigan State the other day, and granted, Michigan State's we don't really know. Buffalo beat a ranked NIU on the road after NIU just came out and beat Notre Dame. So it's not looking that terrible in terms of the teams that we beat. And are we a top 10 team? I don't know. You see this happen all the time with top 10 teams. Look at what it took for Alabama to beat Auburn last year. A 4th and 31. Auburn was 6-7. Lost to Diego Pavia's New Mexico State, by the way, which we'll get into a little bit about Diego Pavia. But this stuff happens. Alabama didn't drop one spot. So this is actually kind of something that I wanted to talk about a little bit. Like, do you think it has to do with that it was Mizzou playing Vanderbilt and it's more about Mizzou? Or because they're giving those other teams the benefit of the doubt. Georgia did drop one spot when they struggled with Kentucky, but just one. But you don't see those teams drop a whole lot.
No, and I think this is something where I'm not an AP voter. I have no actually, frankly, ambitions to be an AP voter, and this is part of why with just these polls in general. If you are a reporter who covers a team, you are on a beat and covering a game, it is very difficult to watch any other college football. So this Saturday against Vanderbilt is actually a perfect example. It was a 3:15 game, which means I got to the stadium at noon. That's when I arrived. So I could have used that 11 a.m. to noon slot to watch, like the first quarter and change of one of those games. I chose not to because I wasn't super invested in anything and wanted to use that time to not think about football, which was going to be the rest of my day. So you get to the stadium, you covered the game at 3:15. And then, everybody else goes home or goes to the bars and they can watch more. No, we've got an hour of interviews and then like 2 hours of writing. So I would have loved to have watched, the Oklahoma-Tennessee game, for example. Right. When I got home, there was 1 minute left in that game. And then I'm not enough of a sicko to stay up and watch, whatever Hawaii's doing on whatever app you have to download to watch them. But so it's really hard if you actually have to cover a game to know what else is happening in the world of college football. And so I imagine most of these voters just largely have to, maybe watch SportsCenter and find some highlights and then, look at some scores. And so, look, the optics of it, double overtime win versus Vanderbilt don't look great. If you look even a little closer, it doesn't look great for Mizzou. You pair that with one score result against Boston College. Anybody who was actually there at that game and watched that game closely knows it. Right. It finished one score, but it was Mizzou took control there. That's the optics of it. And that's what's going to shape the perception. Again, this is 4 games in. It's early for everybody. There's still a lot of jockeying to be done. Most of these top 10 teams, are taking care of business, winning games. And a loss drops you pretty big at this point. So it's tough for those people that, and the AP poll isn't the poll that really matters either, right? It's the CFP rankings that don't come out for another month and a week anyway. So, I think that's part of the process there. If people are worked up about what the polling looks like. But again, I think the fact of the matter is a lot of folks, I don't think it's too critical to say Missouri has not looked like a top 10 team. That seems pretty safe at this point. They could very much be a top 10 team or hop right back in there or wind up as one, but just where things stand after week 4, that's the snapshot of this Mizzou team right now.
And I don't even think I was even too surprised to see Missouri drop out of the top 10 because you mentioned, I think Boston College might be a little bit better than people think that they are, but Vanderbilt, they have more athletes this year than I think they have had in years past, and I think this might be a little bit better of a Vanderbilt team in years past, but that's not an excuse for why it should be a double overtime game against Vanderbilt. You've got the best athlete on the field. Missouri should out-athlete Vanderbilt. That's
and you're favored by 20.
Right, correct. And that's the way that they've been recruiting too, the way that Missouri has recruited the past couple of years, it shouldn't have been close in terms of just athletes on the field. So it brings me kind of, Eli, to this point here about the Missouri offense. I think that's kind of the big sticking point right now. Coming into this season, we're looking at this offense wow, look at all these returning guys. Look at all the returning production. The offensive line, you get some really high marquee transfers on the offensive line. What have you kind of thought of the Missouri offense, and what is the sticking point for you been so far this year?
Yeah, it's been really tough. I think I'll start with the positive and then move to the negative or what I still have questions about. The positive is that the last 2 weeks, the run game has gotten going to a really fantastic degree. The emergence of Nate Noel should not be underestimated because one of the key factors of last season obviously was Cody Schrader and what he did. And I think it's easy for people to forget that at the start of last season, it was supposed to be a committee or tandem or whatever you want to call it of Cody Schrader and Nate Pete. They started off pretty evenly, and then all of a sudden, kind of week 2, week 3, oh, maybe Cody Schrader's the guy, and then all of a sudden, boom, he's the guy. Yeah. A very similar thing could be playing out this year with Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll. Start off pretty even. Okay, yeah, Nate Noel's pulling ahead, and then boom, he's running for almost 200 yards, career high, all of that, and that it's working with the outside zone. That's really positive. Last year, Missouri was so good at being able to run to pass, of just have that run established. So then when you do want to take shots, when you do want to mix in some of the play action stuff, that's there. I think from this Vanderbilt game, the first touchdown to Luther Burden, where it looked like it was going to be outside zone going, Brady Cook bootlegs around, and there's Luther Burden downfield running the same thing, and they're the only two guys that side of the hash marks. Like that's what a run game can get you, is then opening up a play call like that. So that's the positive. That's really good. The deep passing is still a question, and that hasn't been answered, that hasn't been assuaged yet. It's been a talking point through the first 4 weeks, and I think it's deserved. It's hard to evaluate, because there are times where it's like, okay, yeah, Brady Cook missed that throw. There are times where, there were a couple of passes that in the press box we were saying, it's maybe not a drop on Luther Burden, but kind of, if you're supposed to be a Heisman level, Biletnikoff level wide receiver, like maybe you should catch that. Right. So, a couple of plays there, a couple of scheme things maybe too. So and that's what makes it, I think, sort of frustrating for folks, is that it's not like you can pin it down and just say, Brady short-arming all the throws. That's not the case, or that the wideouts aren't there, that the scheme's not there. It's just kind of collectively that's not clicking. And so that's where I think the bye week comes at a good time, that they can kind of go back and evaluate that, and maybe even start from scratch on what needs to happen play calling wise to get that going, because that's an element that was very much there last year that just hasn't reappeared yet this year. And that's going to be the frustrating part, because what this team can be and can do with that element, and it just isn't happening.
I think we kind of maybe hit the lottery on our bye weeks this year with the times that they are. I mean, this one's big, coming before Texas A&M, which is probably at this point a must win. I guess all games when you're in the top 15 are probably must wins, but this is one you kind of have to reestablish yourself a little bit. And then the other one coming obviously between Alabama and OU early November. But the fact of the matter is Brady Cook has to get better. And that has to do with the offensive line. It has to do with him. I think that one of the biggest issues for me is his inability to kind of like audible during a play, right? He telegraphs everything that he's going to do. What they told him the play is, and that's what he goes to. You had multiple times where Brett Norfleet was open and Mookie Cooper was open on the opposite sideline. He's really struggling to kind of turn his body and find those other receivers whenever he's basically told, like, there's one play. His decision-making with the ball's kind of been bothering me a little bit on scramble plays as well, because there was one play specifically I remember that he started running to his right, and Brett Norfleet's open, has lots of field around him, behind him, and he scrambles so close he makes only like a, 5-yard pass or something, and then by the time the defender's already there, he's just not making the best decisions. I don't think the offensive line has helped. The offensive line was pretty bad on Saturday. It was pretty bad. And granted, like, I have to give some credit to Vandy. Tucker, you talked about how they're a little bit of a different team, maybe. I'd say this is probably Vandy's best team in 5 years. Now, is that saying a lot? I don't know. But we talked about last week how Vandy's offensive line, there was nobody smaller than 317 pounds. Like, their defensive line looks much improved. Obviously, Pavia is much improved. So there's a lot of things that they could have done, better, but the offensive line shouldn't have been getting bullied like they were getting bullied. I think he got sacked 8 times, or 8 tackles for loss, or something crazy like that. And regardless, you're still recruiting better players in Vanderbilt. Like you said, Tucker, there's better players on our team than there are in Vanderbilt who should not be getting bullied by them.
Maggie, kind of to your point before, Eli, I want to open that up to you a little bit too. When it comes down to the offense, especially on the offensive side of the ball, it does seem like that there is a little bit of maybe a lack of chemistry. They are replacing a whole left side, in terms of when it comes down to on that offense. And yes, it is week 4, right? They've played 4 football games. That's not a ton. of in terms of chemistry to build with that offensive line. So I can see Brady's hesitations with that. I think you can kind of see that too. That he just doesn't look comfortable to me when I watch it happen, especially in the passing game. He's feeling things that aren't there, and he's maybe it is because of, he just doesn't really know. He's not really comfortable with that left side quite yet. That downfield passing is affected and the whole passing game as a whole. But Eli, to your point, like the running game looks very good, and they kind of need to lean on that for a while. And this is the big thing for me when I watch this offense. They're not doing the same stuff that made them successful last year, right? The laterals, the lateral motions, the quick and easy completions, the screen game. It feels like they've kind of abandoned all that stuff. I remember them running a few pitch passes, pop passes to Luther and to Theo, Mookie, all those guys, getting them moving laterally to then open up the deep shots and everything like that. And yeah, I know the big buzzword right now with just in terms of football in general is cover two defenses. We saw a lot of too high safeties, right? But you know how to get them out of too high safeties is to run the ball and run it down the middle. You got to bring those safeties down a little bit. I think that's what Missouri has to do if they want to get Brady a little bit more comfortable to throw those deep balls.
That's definitely part of it. And actually, I think one of the things that jumped out to me from the Vanderbilt game was just how ineffective the designed run game was for Brady Cook. There was a play I think about. I think it was the third down. They were down in front of the south end zone, and it was close to the goal line, and they didn't convert it, and that led to then Blake Craig coming out, and that was when he kicked the field goal off the upright and missed there. And so it was a 3rd and 2 situation, and it was a design run for Brady Cook where he takes it, and it's kind of a QB power play where it's sort of a hybrid zone of Brady find the gap, power through it, get us the first down, and whatever. They run it a lot on the goal line. It's one of their go-to 2-point conversion plays when they're in that situation. And Cook just gets the snap, and he steps forward, and there isn't really a hole, and there's not a great seal on the edge. He can't really bounce it out, and so he just kind of has to, power. It wasn't even really powering because there wasn't anywhere for him to go. Just kind of go into contact, and then it's your quarterback, going into a pile, and nothing happens. That's a play that works so often and works so well for his skill set, but just didn't click in that instance, and it's on a 3rd down. And post-game coach Drinkwitz was not happy with the red zone offensive execution, but it's a play like that turns what could have been a touchdown into a field goal opportunity that's then missed, and all of a sudden that's several points off the board just from one play. So I think that's a factor with it. Maggie, to your point, this offensive system does try to make things pretty easy for Brady with the reads of doing a lot of high-low reads or stacked reads where it's look downfield, and if that's not there in that same line of sight, there's a closer option, whether that's Norfleet or Mookie Cooper or running back or whatever. It doesn't seem like those concepts are clicking as much this year, and some of that might be a byproduct of it's on tape last year of how this offense wants to operate, especially the pass game with everybody coming back. That's I guess maybe the other side of that coin that I'm not sure a lot of us really thought about in the offseason, that maybe that makes it a little more predictable and that you can't just do the same things. In to your point as well, getting Brett Norfleet involved is something that I think would help this offense going forward. I'm still not sure if he's 100%. I saw down on the field before the game, he's still wearing a shoulder kind of brace strap situation there. Maybe there's kind of a snap count or target count that they're trying to hold him to at this point and to keep him from taking too many hits. So that's going to be a tough element of this as well. Again, you sort of realize too that there are so many things this offense can do in any given situation, right? You could say, hey, let's make an emphasis of just getting the run game going, or let's really try to get Luther going and run jet sweep, run, something short and easy to him, whether that's a slant or a screen or something like that, versus trying to mix in the downfield shots. I almost wonder if there's just an element of Kirby Moore and this offense needing to maybe refine what it wants to be good at or emphasize. Again, there's been a lot of talk so far of the deep shot, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's getting the short stuff going. I don't really know there, but it feels like maybe it's a little bit of trying to do too many things offensively and then not being able to master them.
Yeah, I think this is really the second week that we've seen them not utilize Luther in the backfield at all, which is, to Tucker's point about not doing things that were successful last year. I think the best athlete on the field, and I'm going to say that I think Brett Northley is maybe the second best athlete on the field. I know he's a great baseball player as well, so he's, just athletic. I'd love to get them both more involved. But I think you kind of have to put Luther back there some as a threat and keep defenses on their toes, because I think that's been a big struggle. I think one of our biggest struggles is really once the field gets smaller, we're not able to execute on that. And I don't really exactly know why it is. Mizzou has attempted, I saw this on Power Mizzou this morning, Mizzou has attempted 3 more field goals than any other team in FBS.
Wow.
To me, that's kind of actually crazy, because the teams that we've played haven't been juggernauts. They're not terrible, but they're not juggernauts. We should be able to score against them. And we're just not finding the ability to score once we get into the opponent's red zone.
That's something that was really interesting to look at this preseason. I'd right before the start of fall camp, I'd actually talked to Kirby more about this, because he this offseason looked back at the numbers, and Mizzou was not happy just as a coaching staff with how things went in the red zone last year, which is actually really interesting, because if you go to ESPN team stats and sort them, they actually had ridiculous red zone efficiency. But it's because they settled for a lot of field goals, and Harrison Mevis was automatic from that sort of range. And so, yeah, they came away with points on a lot of their drives, but it wasn't as many touchdowns as they wanted. And so that was basically what Kirby Moore did this offseason, was focus on how can we get better in the red zone? How can we get better on third downs in the red zone, especially those 3rd and goals? That was what he really keyed in on. And he knows a lot of folks in football, so he was talking to his brother, who's now with the Eagles, and watching college tape, NFL tape for what teams do here, and what works with that. And so I think that maybe makes it a little bit more concerning that hasn't translated through the first 4 games. That I haven't looked too much at the numbers to say it's certifiably worse, but it doesn't seem like it's improved in that part of the field. So that's where I think, again, this bye week is kind of a point of, all right, it's another chance to reset, even though the offseason was. So that's something that I think will 100% be a focus during the next week, in addition to all the other things that need to be cleaned up before A&M. But that's a really interesting part of the field to pinpoint and keep an eye on in the first game or two out of this bye.
Yeah, that's going to be something to keep an eye on. But we'll get to talk about the defense here in a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about our friends at homefieldapparel.com. Look, they got the great vintage logos. This is one of my favorite designs that they have. If you're watching on the podcast, on the YouTube, the Leaping Tiger. Maggie's got a great one there. We're both wearing the crew necks because, look, it is sweater weather now. It's officially fall. The weather's cooling down in Kansas City and St. Louis. It's cooling down everywhere. We're ready for it. I know I'm ready for it, but you can go to homefieldapparel.com, get 15% off your first order with the code Mizzou24. They don't only have Mizzou, they got over 150 schools. They're announcing new schools. It seems like every week they've always got a new school going on there. So if you want a random team for your college football 25 dynasty, they got you covered. They'll get you set up there. They're high quality t-shirts. I've got USC. I've got TCU. I've got Rutgers. I've got it all.
Tulane ones are pretty cool.
Tulane is pretty sick. Missouri. Look, I know a lot of people, they'll look at some of the Missouri vintage stuff and be like, oh, I think a lot of schools are cooler. They think that sometimes just because you're so used to the logos. But look, the Mizzou logos, sometimes they never go out of style. They always look good no matter what sport you're wearing it to. Make sure to go check them out. Homefieldapparel.com. Use that code Mizzou24 for 15% off your first order there. We're going to take a break. When we get back on the other side, we will talk about defense coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com. Wouldn't it be nice to have a wireless provider that's straight up, with no BS, no complicated bills, fees, or upcharges? Well, with Mint Mobile, you can say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at just $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. And if you're worried about losing your phone or phone number or contacts, with Mint Mobile you can bring all of that over to join Mint Mobile's plan. Ditch overpriced wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for just $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and a new 3-month wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/KCSNMTW. That's mintmobile.com/KCSNMTW. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/KCSNMTW. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
If you're looking to go to Columbia, you want some Missouri Tigers tickets, you can use the code KCSN for the best price available. That code legitimately will give you the best price available. We work it out with Tickets for Less. They give you the best discount that they have anywhere on their site actively. That will be Auburn. That'd be homecoming. You could get that discount on. Missouri's away from home for a little bit here as they are on this bye week, and then they go to Texas A&M October the 5th. And then October the 12th, they take that wonderful road trip to Amherst, Massachusetts, and they take on UMass. But Eli, appreciate you hanging out with us, talking as we go through this Missouri defense. And look, just to start out, I've been really impressed with Corey Padune's squad and how he's been able to adjust. I think that's the biggest thing for me is the in-game adjustments after stuff hits the fan, right? Like the first couple drives, maybe things aren't going too well. All right, boom, he's able to go 3 down linemen and keep Thomas Castellanos in the pocket. He's able to contain Diego Pavia, who is the most chaotic quarterback of all time. There's something about Diego Pavia, even back at New Mexico State. I loved watching Diego Pavia, so the fact I got to see him in person was kind of special to me. As the sicko in me kind of smiled a little bit when I saw Diego Pavia just do the most dumbest stuff of all time, and it somehow worked out. But they're able to adjust, and they're able to contain these offenses to, I think it was 3 yards in a span of 20 odd some odd minutes in this game. That middle part of the game, the Missouri defense really showed up when they needed to, and I've been really impressed with the squad.
Yeah, that was a very impressive stretch there, and I think, generally in overtime, they stepped up there too, forcing Vandy into that field goal in double overtime. If Vandy had made that game would have kept going, right? So just the defense, they kept Vanderbilt from winning in that moment, which was what was needed. So the situational aspect of that is really valuable too. But I've been very impressed with what Corey Batune has brought. And actually, I think the thing that has stood out to me the most is how much his scheme has seemed to be in line with what we as reporters were told about this back when he was hired in the spring. There's a lot of talk of maintaining continuity with what Blake Baker did, but, adding some twists, adding some wrinkles, and keeping this aligned with what the priorities of Eli Drinkwitz are. And, he's an offensive-minded head coach, but he's still a head coach, and he has a vision of what he wants his defense to be, maybe more stylistically than anything else. And one of the big things for him, and it's something that I can always tell he likes in a defense because it's the thing he tends to praise with opponents a lot, is being able to be multiple up front. And what's really I found interesting about what Corey Batune has thrown out there the last 2 weeks against Boston College and Vanderbilt, there's the base 4-2-5 defense. Then there's been 3 down linemen and a 3-1-7. That's the Prowler package that Blake Baker would use a lot on 3rd and longs. And then the last 2 weeks, there's actually been a 5 down lineman setup where it's been a 5-2-4. That's kind of an inverse of that with a nose tackle in there that they've used specifically to contain guys like Castellanos and Pavia. That I imagine that's what'll come out. If it's Marcel Reed for A&M, when it's Jalen Melrose, and I can't keep track of who the quarterbacks are going to be for some of these SC teams now. They're moving it around, but it's you've
already been cleared, so you never know.
Yeah, exactly. So if there's a mobile quarterback, I think this is something that Corey Batune will put out there. And so that's been really interesting. It's added some unpredictability. I think actually there's a perfect example. So that 5-man front went on tape for the first time against Boston College. It was brand new in that game. So Vanderbilt saw that. Assuming they watched any of that game, they knew that was something that could be thrown at them. Mizzou brought that out on the second play of the game. It was the 2nd and 5 in the first quarter. Immediately, Vanderbilt false starts when they see that front. It was a 5-man front with Tristan Newsom, the outside linebacker, down, looking like he was going to blitz as well. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but Mizzou changes up its defense into something that isn't on the tape a whole lot. That causes some confusion for the other team. I think that's notable. And the ability to fluctuate between that, the ability to get into different, to get into the same look from different formations and different looks from the same formations. All of that is really impressive with Corey Batune. The transfers in the heart of that defense, Khalil Jacobs and Torrey Flagg, have been really impressive. So, you could argue that maybe they allowed too many points to Vanderbilt. I don't know. I think just the way the defense has looked and the way it seems to be ramping up and coming together, I think has been a positive so far.
You mentioned the Vanderbilt penalty on that 2nd and 5, the false start, and with everything that Mizzou did badly on Saturday, basically the entire game. Okay, I mean the defense adjusted and that was good. After that first quarter, but Mizzou only had 3 penalties, and if you think about things that could potentially be game winners, it's keeping your penalty count low. I think they were 3 for 33. Vanderbilt had, I believe, 9 for 83 or 8 for 93. So, I mean, keeping yourself in that position to, not be giving away free yards whenever the defense, might be struggling at first and the offense isn't getting yards. To me, that's huge. I also think that, Chris McClellan maybe had like one of his better games. I think Marvin Burks Jr. had a great game, even though I always get a little bit weary about saying it's awesome that a safety had 12 tackles because I'm not entirely sure if that's always great. But I mean, if he's not back there, it could have been worse. The problem for me with the defense, obviously it's in our secondary, is giving up those big plays. We've only given up 6 touchdowns all year. That's not terrible. But 3 of those touchdowns have been, I think there's 2 in the 38 yards, 67 yards, and 65 yards. So there's a lot of breakdowns happening in that secondary that it's not going to be able to happen moving forward unless maybe you make a mistake at UMass. You can still come back for it. But a lot of those other teams that we play, you won't really be able to come back if you're giving up those big plays.
Yeah, I think with some of those breakdowns, the key there just has to be eye discipline for this secondary. And they knew that was the case against Boston College. That long touchdown from that game was, when Castellanos, I think it was a bad snap. The ball was on the ground one way or another in the backfield, and then he picks it up, and he had 2 options who both released over the top there. So that's a problem there. But, you can look at it as, maybe a good problem to have, that the defensive backs wanted to be ball hawks, saw the ball hit the ground, and reacted to that, right? I think the lesson is that can't happen. And then you see with the busted coverage against Vanderbilt, it was, Toriano Pride, that was his mark, that was his guy in coverage. And you see, I don't know what he saw in the backfield, but you can see on the all-22, his head turns and he hesitates for a second because he sees something back there. And that's just enough to let that wide receiver, who, he's a quick guy, but that's enough to get him over the top, and there's no catching up at that point. It's a small mistake, but 2 times, and that's going to be exploited by opposing quarterbacks when they see that. So getting that polished up, I think Toriano Pride, it's there's been a lesson learned, and I think it's a similar lesson that's being learned with Caden Green on the offensive side, that you can bring in transfers who have a ton of talent and a ton of potential. That doesn't necessarily replace an outgoing player who had a lot of experience. It's Xavier Delgado, and then you look at the quarterback tandem of KAD and Ennis. Those are guys who had a lot of talent and also a lot of experience. Again, Toriano Pride absolutely could get there. Caden Green could absolutely get there, but they're still young guys. They're still Caden Green has a few more starts than Pride does, but Pride is making some of his first starts this year. Those are lessons, especially lessons to be learned in consistency, which is what you need from somebody who's going to start and play almost every snap like both those guys do. So that's something to watch, going forward and polishing up those little things. Again, I think generally good, but yeah, the big breakdowns, every team except for maybe UMass is going to be able to capitalize on those if you give it to them. So need those to be off the tape coming out of the bye week.
Another thing that's been pretty impressive about this Missouri defense is their rush defense. They've been really good on the front against opposing rushers. The stat from the Mizzou Sports Information Department, I saw this when the postgame notes came out. I was like, wow, I cannot believe this. Mizzou has not allowed a 100-yard rusher in any of their last 10 games dating back to October 14th. That was at Kentucky with Ray Davis. So he had 130 yards. So that's been a minute since Missouri has allowed a guy on the ground to gain a bunch of yards. They did just face a couple of pretty mobile quarterbacks, again, as we mentioned those already. But I think that the defensive front 7 has been really impressive with me. Again, you replaced some pretty solid linebackers the past few years, really dating back to Nick Bolton being there. You're replacing some pretty solid backers that just keep that same consistency in terms of run stopping. up on there. So, Eli, I guess what are your thoughts on just the Missouri's defense and their ability to stop the run?
Yeah, like you said, I think it's been really impressive, and it comes down to, I think, the linebacker rotation and what they're able to do there. The snap counts didn't really reflect it against Vanderbilt, but I thought, especially through the first 3 weeks, it actually seemed pretty even to me between Chuck Hicks and Corey Flagg at that middle linebacker spot, and then between Tristan Newson and Khalil Jacobs at that outside spot. Just, Hicks and Newson are the starters because they've been around and have more experience, but I could see a world in which that ends up flipping around, not necessarily because of injury. And also, they rotate them in and out with situational things, and Khalil Jacobs tends to be the third down backer when they go down to one. So some of that stuff, can get in the weeds a little bit. But I think generally been very, very good there. And you have to be sort of impressed with the athleticism. Corey Flagg is a guy who, if you ever stand next to him, you would not really actually think he's a linebacker. Like he's built, and I would not want to be tackled by him, but he's not the tallest dude. He's not, Tyron Hopper was just this insanely massive human being in every sense of it. Corey Flagg, no offense to him if he's listening, he's not that, but he can move around like crazy. And sometimes the fact that he's a little shorter, I actually think that helps with these mobile quarterbacks who are also a little shorter. That I sometimes I wondered with Castellanos if he's in the pocket and stepping out, if when he's in the trees of his linemen, if he would just not see Corey Flagg, especially if he's in a spiral and then get snapped up by him. Again, I don't know if that's actually how it operates on the field. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But his ability to move around and leap into holes, I think, has been good. Some of the tackling issues that were there early on last season don't seem to be there this year. Travis Johnson, the safety, had a couple high-profile misses. Joe Moore, the defensive end, had a high-profile miss. But generally, the tackling seems pretty good, which that's a key with this run defense too. The defense should always be able to get to a running back within the first few yards at most. Stop him there. Don't give him 7 when it could have only been 3. So I think that's been a key as well. That's been a positive so far.
Yeah, and I think going into a league where you typically always see good running backs, I mean, I'm not sure, I can't remember who A&M's running back is off the top of my head. But I mean, you're going to, you have to go to Alabama, and Arkansas is a pretty good running back this year. And last year, we faced the 3-headed monster of the running backs at Tennessee. So they're going to face a lot more than what they've seen, especially like you said, we've really faced rushing quarterbacks who kind of duel themselves as running backs. So yeah, it's going to be a test, but I think from what I see, it's all positive in that rush game. Just got to get that secondary fixed.
Yeah, that's going to be a big thing here as we move ahead. Maggie, anything else that we didn't touch on from the Vanderbilt game moving ahead, or any other questions that we have here?
I do have one little topic I want to talk about. So Florida still has a head coach, okay? They still have a head coach. He's coaching there. He won a game the other day. He did give up 28 points to Mississippi State, which I'm not sure I'm utterly impressed with that.
Right.
But do we have anything to worry about? What's your opinion? I saw Lane Kiffin's up there. I don't think Lane has anything to gain by going to Florida. I personally don't think that Drink at this point has anything to gain by going to Florida. Billy Napier's salary right now is, I think, $7.4 million. Drink's making $9 million. So basically, he'd have to be a top 3 paid college football coach to go to a dumpster fire of Florida right now. I don't really see where the benefit is, but I kind of wanted your thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is obviously something that has been trended for folks to maybe worry about when I'm not sure they have to. I think there's one element of it which is just is Drink the kind of guy that Florida would go after? It seems like yes. I have no idea there, so I just but that's one variable here that shouldn't be ignored. The bigger one that we can talk about here obviously is whether Coach Drinkwitz would want to go. I think if this season goes the way it could/should, depending on the way you look at it, for both Missouri and Florida, based on how those programs are trending, there is a legitimate argument that you could make that in December or November or whenever that Florida job opens and whenever Florida wants to make a hire, that Missouri as a program will be in a better spot than Florida is. And I don't think that's a huge stretch or anything improbable like that. That very much could be where things stand in the not too distant future. There's also the matter of Florida being a mess from a leadership standpoint. They don't have a university president, and that there's the administrative things there are just an absolute mess. Now, the Mizzou administration has had its flaws, right? The athletic director search and departure, that showed that. But what Mizzou's administration has been very aligned with and very efficient with is keeping Eli Drinkwitz as the Missouri football coach. Yeah. They gave him an extension when, maybe he didn't deserve it, or a lot of people weren't too high on that. They gave him another extension this offseason when, I don't think, the Floridas of the world weren't calling this past offseason, but Mizzou wanted to make that investment anyway and get ahead of this. They kind of had the sense of, they knew what they had. They've also, beyond that, made the investment in Memorial Stadium, $250 million. It's not going into Eli Drinkwitz's pockets, but it's still a big investment in him in this program. They're turning a part of the stadium into a recruiting space. That's Eli Drinkwitz's office. That's his jungle gym that he gets to play around in, right? All of those investments, I think, also matter to this. Now, if Eli Drinkwitz wants to be the head coach at Florida and they come calling, then he'll go be the head coach at Florida, right? Like that, the money can be worked out if there's a true desire there. But I just think what he has going on at Mizzou, what he has built at Mizzou, what Mizzou is able to offer him should not be discounted in that equation. So again, I don't expect most folks to think of the positives. They can drift towards the negative and the panic if they want. But that is relevant to this. That will be a factor if this actually comes up. But again, there are a lot of variables that would have to happen between, I think, now and Coach Drink taking the job at Florida.
Well, like Napier would have to be fired.
Exactly, that being one of them.
Yeah, that is a big deal.
I love all the Betty nods. I'm like, he's still the coach. Like, could you imagine? So there's like Betty nods for your job, and you're like, I literally am still here every day.
It is quite an interesting situation too, because are they going to let the athletic director? Is Florida going to let their athletic director make that call? And that's another spot that goes into it. Are they going to have to find another athletic director? Is he going to make it through all this when Napier gets fired too? You don't know that. So like, there's a lot that goes into it. Eli, I think you make a really good point about just the situation in Florida is not good. And like, when you look at the situation at Missouri and Ole Miss, you can bring it both into there. The situations that Lane Kiffin and Eli Drinkwitz have at their respective schools is a lot better to, like, why would you, the grass is not always greener, right? Like, why would you leave what you have built already at Missouri and all the momentum Missouri has right now? Why would you leave what you built at Ole Miss, all the momentum that Ole Miss has right now, to go to Florida, which traditionally, historically, a better program might still be a better job just to look at it in a vacuum, right? That might be a better job in a vacuum, but when you look at the situations of the coaches, I don't really think Missouri has much to be worried about. And maybe Florida fans can clip this of me saying that once, if that does happen. But like, I just don't think that like it's desirable. Like, Eli, I think you really made a really good point about just like no university president. That's kind of a big deal when it comes to making decisions for a university to have a president. But yeah, I think that's going to be a big thing as Missouri continues to have success. I think a lot of times Mizzou nationally is not viewed as like a top tier SEC program, right? That's not shocking for me to say that to anybody listening to the podcast. So they're always going to say, hey, maybe Eli Drinkwitz can go here. Maybe he can go there. Maybe he can go there. That's always going to be happening until, I guess, Mizzou does become the top end SEC program and Eli Drinkwitz takes them there. But it's going to be one of those things certainly to watch and have to weather through as we navigate here. But Eli, appreciate you hopping on here. You go follow Eli on Twitter at @byelihoff on Twitter. Find all of your stuff there at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. So appreciate you hopping on and sharing your knowledge on the Missouri Tigers with us.
Of course, appreciate you guys having me. It was a blast.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of Mizzou That's Who. Bye week for the Missouri Tigers. No post-game show. We'll be back next week looking at Texas A&M versus Missouri. 11 a.m. kickoff. That game's on ABC. That was announced. Big game for Mizzou, really for Texas A&M as well. It's going to be a big game in the SEC. We'll be back next week to preview that one. So for Maggie Johnson, I'm Tucker Franklin. We'll catch you next time.